We are here with Sean Hellquist talking about transitioning. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here, and I know you told me you transitioned when you were 19. So explain a little bit, what is transitioning?
So transitioning is basically when a person is born, let's say for me, I was born female, and people will transition when they don't feel that gender aligns with how they feel. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of the time people are like, how does that work though? And a lot of people think that gender is the same as, your sex organs, and it's not. Gender is much more in your brain than it is anywhere else. And so for me, at 19, I transitioned from female to male, and that was almost 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very good explanation. I really appreciate how you explain that, because there's lots of people that don't understand, but explain a little bit more how it was like for you to transition.
Right. So I think the earliest time that I realized that I was different from the rest of my peer group was probably in preschool. Kind of when you get to that age where you can differentiate between that's a girl thing and that's a boy thing is when I really realized that I was different. Mm-hmm. But at that time, it was like a kept secret. I don't know why I thought it needed to be a secret, but it was. And my dad actually asked me when I was younger if I liked being a girl. And I remember I said yes, and I remember that was very much a lie. Mm-hmm. But I don't know really why I felt it needed to be a secret, but it was. Right up until the time that I was in post-secondary. I was going to SciAst, and we were entering our third semester, where we were going to have to start doing stuff out in the world, dressed in business casual and doing stuff for actual companies in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of at that point when I realized that I couldn't go into a workforce as a woman, because that's just not how I felt. And it was around that time where I realized that transitioning was actually possible, and it was actually a real thing, and that I wasn't just crazy for the most part. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because I'm sure there wasn't a lot of information about that when you were growing up.
No, like when I was growing up, in our health ed classes, there was very little talk about even gay and lesbian health or identities, let alone trans identities and stuff like that. And so, when I grew up, there was very little exposure. Mm-hmm. Definitely more exposure now that I think about it than there was, say, like 30 or 40 years ago, but not enough for really to me to connect the dots that might be something that I was struggling with. And it wasn't until I was 18, I guess, that I found in a YouTube spiral, mm-hmm. found another person that was documenting their transition online and realized this person is talking about my life. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so, finding information was tough. Even 8 years ago, there was lots of information for like the States, mm-hmm. But very little information for Canada, and like let alone Saskatoon, right? Mm-hmm. Saskatoon is such a small community comparatively, mm-hmm. so.
That's why I wanted to have you on my show, because you rock for coming out, and maybe there's other people that are struggling just like you, or people need information, and it's good to have very good information. Mm-hmm. And so tell us about how you came transition with your parents and coming out to them, and what was that like, that experience?
Right. So from the time that I realized that I was trans and this was something I needed to do, was transition, it was about a year before I came out to my family. And I went kind of back and forth about how I was going to do that. And so I decided I was going to write them a letter, kind of just explaining how I felt and the process that I wanted to take and how I was going to do it. And I really put a focus in that letter about that it wasn't my parents' fault that this was going on for me. Because it's not. There's nothing that they could have changed or done in my upbringing that would have made me feel any different. It's just, that's how it is. Mm-hmm. So I decided I needed to give this letter to my sister first to kind of test the water. And so I went into her room one night and I said, do you ever have like a secret that you never told anybody? And she said, yeah. And I said, okay, well, what is it? And she told me, and she was like, why? Why are you asking? That's so weird. So I took her into my room and I sat on my bed. We sat on my bed and I gave her this letter and she started reading it. And I was like a nervous wreck. I wasn't sure how she was going to react. And then she started crying and I was like, oh dear, what have I done? And she put the letter down and she said, I'm just so happy for you. Mm-hmm. And so it was at that point where I realized I had at least one person in my corner. So not too long after that, my sister wingman for me, and I gave her the letter and I said, take this to mom and dad, let them read it, text me 30-second updates, and let me know how it's going. And so she did. It was Family Day in 2011 or 2010, I guess. And so, shortly after that, she said, Mom and Dad want to see you. And so I went upstairs, and my mom was crying, and she stood up and gave me a hug and said, I love you. And it was kind of at that point where I realized I had taken those words for granted up until that point.
That's so important to have support, isn't it?
Yeah, and unfortunately, reality for lots of trans people is that they don't have the family support. And it's unfortunate, but it is a reality.
And I think Camp Firefly, I see you have a beautiful shirt on with Camp Firefly. And how does that support you?
So I started going to Camp Firefly about 7 years ago. And I really didn't know anything about it before I went. My friend was trying to get me to go for a while, and it just so happened that I had time to go. And when I went, I was in a really good place in my life, and so I wasn't sure what I was going to get out of it. But the first year that I went was so amazing, and just to be surrounded in such a positive atmosphere with like-minded individuals who kind of have the same struggles that you have, it was amazing. There's really no words for it. But it was at that point where I realized that Camp Firefly had to be a staple in my summer every year, and I have been a part of it since then. I think the best part about Camp Firefly is, you would think in 4 days nothing could really change, but in those 4 days, my favorite part of camp every year is seeing those campers come and being absolutely terrified to talk to anybody. And then by the end of that 4 days, they've made 40 different friends, and they're so outgoing, and they just become real leaders in their own lives and have gained so much resilience to go back to their community.
Well, it takes a lot of courage. And talk about your struggles. What are some of the struggles, and what are some of the advice you can give to other, either transgender people or just to families that maybe, have someone that's transitioning in their family or something?
Yeah, so I guess my biggest advice for families is, if you have a person in your life that's come out as trans, just really trying hard to respect their new preferred name and their preferred pronouns is huge. And I mean, people make mistakes, it happens, but just being really diligent on correcting yourself when you make a mistake and just respecting that person's identity, I think is the big thing for families. Some of the struggles I had was, within the medical system, right? Trying to start hormones and have surgeries and stuff like that. And there's not a lot of doctors that are educated in this field. And so it's sometimes hard to find a person who's willing to work with you. But the best advice I can have is don't give up. I kind of pushed my way through it, and I mean, if you keep calling, people will do what you want.
Okay.
So just keep your head up and don't give up. There's people out there that are willing to help you. It's just sometimes a little bit of a struggle to find them, and there's so many great resources online now, especially for Saskatoon.
Okay. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I actually saw this morning, they're posting that there's going to be a course in high school about, I'm not sure if it's called transgender or what the name of the course is, but somewhere in that, with that information there.
Right.
So that would be kind of a first. I don't think I've ever heard of that before, taking a course in that area.
Yeah. Camp Firefly has kind of have a sister program almost, and it's called Firefly in Schools. And so it's kind of just getting off the ground, but it's we have people going into schools and doing presentations on LGBT issues and all sorts of stuff like that. So I know last year it was really big in southern Saskatchewan, and so now it's kind of coming up more north. And I think it's going to be really important because, as society becomes more and more accepting of LGBT identities, we need more education so people can understand things that are outside their experience.
That is so important. Education is so important, and treating people with respect and dignity, whatever their lifestyle. And so that's why I wanted to have you on my show, and I really appreciate you coming and sharing your information. Anything else that you would like to share that would be important?
Yeah, I think just telling people that if you're trans, you are valid. Your identity is valid, and don't let anyone else tell you otherwise than that.
Because I know there's a lot of bullying out there, and it's important to find, like you said, like-minded people, support systems that
Yeah.
are very essential.
And it could seem like it's impossible to find those people, but they are out there.
Okay,
And
that's so good to know. And do you Google or for information, or how did you find out your information?
well, I found out most of my information through YouTube, which led me into local resources. Out Saskatoon is
Okay.
a great resource.
Okay.
And Camp Firefly happens in Saskatchewan every summer.
Okay.
Goes between Regina and Saskatoon, so that's worth checking out. And if you just type in Camp Firefly Saskatchewan, it'll lead you to a USask page.
And what about in the medical profession? What kind of resources are there that you know of?
So there's a lot of Facebook groups online too that you can join, and in those groups, a lot of people will share their experiences with the doctors that they've encountered, and so trying to integrate yourself into that. There's no real website for like these doctors are trans friendly, but sometimes it's just trial and error. For me, it was trial and error. You find one that works.
That was Sean Hellquist with his experience with transitioning.